Your child just asked you why the sky is blue. You answer. Then comes another why. Then another. By dinner, you've fielded 70 of them. You're exhausted. Your patience is thin. But the real answer is far stranger than annoying curiosity. Your child isn't testing your patience. Your child is running one of the most sophisticated learning systems on the planet. And it happens to look, from the outside, exactly like a small person who simply won't stop asking questions. Think about your own day for a moment. How many times did you ask why something happened? Once? Twice? Maybe not at all. Now think about your child. Researchers who recorded real conversations between young children and their parents found something startling. A child between the ages of 2 and 5 asks an adult around 70 to 100 explanatory questions a day. Not requests. Not demands for snacks or toys. Explanatory questions. Questions that all point toward one thing: why? That number sounds exaggerated until someone actually sits down and counts it. Psychologist Michelle Chouinard did exactly that. She analyzed hours of recorded parent-child conversation, line by line, and found that young children ask far more why and how questions than any other type of question combined. Not what's that? Not can I have? Why? Over and over, aimed directly at the hidden machinery behind the world. Here's where it gets strange. Chouinard's research uncovered something hiding inside those questions that most parents never notice. Most of the time, when an adult gives a vague or incomplete answer, the child doesn't simply accept it and move on. The child pushes back. They ask again, slightly reworded, until they receive an explanation that actually satisfies something inside their brain. Your child isn't just collecting facts the way a sponge collects water. Your child is auditing your answers. Grading them. Deciding, in real time, whether what you just said actually counts as an explanation. So what is actually happening inside that small skull every single time the question why leaves their mouth? Picture your child's brain as a machine built for one specific job, figuring out cause and effect. Psychologist Alison Gopnik has spent decades studying this exact process, and her research compares young children to scientists running experiments. Not symbolically. Literally. A toddler stacking blocks and watching them fall isn't just playing. They are testing a hypothesis about gravity. A child poking at a toy until it finally makes a sound is running a small, controlled experiment on causality, adjusting one variable at a time. The why question that follows is simply the verbal version of that same experiment, asked out loud instead of acted out with their hands. Here's the part that should change how you see every interruption at the dinner table. Your child's brain is doing something most adult brains have quietly stopped doing. It's building what scientists call a causal model. Not a list of disconnected facts, but a working theory of how the world operates underneath the surface. Why does the ball roll? Why does the dog bark at strangers? Why does dad get tired after work but not after a vacation? Each answer becomes one wire connected to the next, slowly building an internal map of cause and effect that will quietly guide how your child reasons for the rest of their life. Did you know that map is being built faster between ages 2 and 7 than at almost any other point in a human life? There's a reason for the timing, and it isn't random. A child's brain isn't yet weighed down by what researchers call prior knowledge bias, the tendency adults develop to stop questioning things they already believe they understand well enough. You stopped asking why the sky is blue around age 9, probably. Not because you suddenly understood the physics of light scattering through a hazy atmosphere. You stopped because you accepted it just as a good enough answer to close the loop. Your child hasn't learned to accept that shortcut yet. Their internal filter for what counts as enough explanation hasn't been switched on, and that's exactly why they keep pulling at the thread. This is where the twist gets uncomfortable for most parents to sit with. You might assume your child asks why because they don't understand the world around them. The opposite is closer to the truth. A study led by researcher Brandy Fraser, alongside developmental psychologists Susan Gelman and Henry Wellman, examined hundreds of these everyday why exchanges between parents and children. They found that children are remarkably picky about which explanations they're willing to accept. When adults gave circular or non-informative answers, things like, because that's just how it is or, because I said so, children were significantly more likely to immediately ask a follow-up question. When adults gave a real causal explanation instead, one that actually connected a cause to its effect, children were satisfied and moved on to something else entirely. Your toddler has a built-in detector for weak logic. They simply don't have the vocabulary yet to tell you that your answer didn't hold up. So every time you said just because and got hit with another why in response, that wasn't defiance dressed up as a question. That was your child's brain correctly identifying a gap in your explanation and quietly demanding that the gap be filled. It gets even more interesting when you consider what children do with answers that genuinely satisfy them. Gopnik's research suggests children aren't passively absorbing information the way a hard drive saves a file. They're actively forming theories, testing them against new evidence, and revising them when something doesn't fit. This is precisely what a scientist does in a laboratory. Form a theory. Test it. Update it when it breaks. The only difference is your child's laboratory is the living room floor, and their instruments are blocks, bath water, and you. Here's the modern mirror, and it might sting a little. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, most people lose this instinct almost entirely. Not because curiosity disappears overnight, but because the environment slowly trains it out of a person. School often rewards producing the right answer quickly, not asking a better question slowly. Workplaces tend to reward speed and confidence, not admitting confusion. Saying "I don't actually understand why this works" starts to feel embarrassing instead of completely natural. Bit by bit, the question that once came automatically and constantly gets replaced by quiet, polite acceptance. Think about the last time you used a piece of technology you didn't really understand, or followed advice you never once questioned, or nodded along in a meeting instead of asking the obvious thing everyone in the room seemed to be avoiding. That instinct your child has right now, the one currently driving you a little insane over dinner, is the exact instinct most adults spend years quietly trying to win back. There's a darker side to losing it, too. Researchers who study reasoning in adults have found that people who stop asking causal questions tend to rely more heavily on surface-level patterns and assumptions instead of actual understanding. They accept explanations that sound right rather than explanations that are right. A child asking why 70 times a day is, in a strange sense, doing preventative maintenance on their own mind, keeping the habit of real understanding alive before the world has a chance to talk them out of it. There's something else worth sitting with for a moment. Every single one of those 70 questions today wasn't noise, even if it felt like it by the third hour. It was your child's brain quietly constructing the operating system they'll use to understand everything else for the rest of their life. The questions about the sky and the questions about death and the questions about why people get divorced, years from now, will run on the same circuitry being wired right now, one why at a time, one answer at a time, one follow-up question at a time when your answer wasn't quite good enough. This is also why the way you answer matters more than most parents realize. Researchers consistently find that when adults respond to a why question with an actual explanation, even a simple one, children's questioning becomes more sophisticated over time rather than less frequent. The habit doesn't fade because it gets satisfied. It deepens. Children who receive real explanations tend to ask increasingly precise, increasingly causal questions as they grow, building sharper and sharper models of how things actually work. Children who get shut down with "because I said so" too often tend to ask fewer real questions later, not because their curiosity disappeared, but because they learned the question wasn't worth the effort. Consider, too, why this particular question word shows up so much earlier and so much more often than its cousins. Children ask what constantly in infancy, pointing at objects, naming the world piece by piece. But why arrives later, usually somewhere around age 2.5, and once it arrives, it rarely leaves. That timing isn't a coincidence. What questions build a catalog of the world? Why questions build a structure underneath that catalog, linking each item to a cause. A child has to first know what a dog is before they can meaningfully ask why it barks. The explosion of why questions you're living through right now is a sign that your child has finished cataloging and started architecting. They have enough raw material. Now they're building the framework that holds it all together. This is also why children rarely ask why about things that don't seem connected to anything else. They ask why the dog barks, but rarely why the number 4 exists. They ask why people cry, but rarely why a word is spelled a certain way. The questions cluster around cause and effect, around agents and actions, around things that do something to other things. That clustering is itself a clue. It tells researchers that the underlying drive isn't curiosity in some vague, general sense. It's specifically causal curiosity, a hunger to understand what makes things happen, not just what things are called. There's a reason this matters beyond the dinner table, too. The same body of research into early questioning patterns has found a connection to later academic outcomes. Children who ask more causal questions, and who receive real explanations in return, tend to develop stronger reasoning skills years down the line, particularly in subjects like science and math that depend on understanding why something works rather than simply memorizing that it does. The habit being built right now, the one testing your patience over dinner, is quietly laying tracks toward how well your child will eventually reason through a chemistry problem or a math proof a decade from now. So the next time it happens, your child looks up mid-dinner and asks why the moon doesn't fall down. You feel that familiar flicker of exhaustion creeping in, the urge to say it just doesn't and get back to your food. Try noticing what's actually happening instead. A small, relentless scientist is sitting across the table from you, refusing to accept an answer that doesn't actually explain anything. Refusing, in other words, to do the thing most adults eventually learn to do without even noticing they're doing it. Maybe the real question was never why your child asks why so much. Maybe the real question is why you stopped.